Montana Territory, late spring of 1879. The wind carried dust through the wide open streets of Dead Horse Gulch, where the clatter of wagon wheels and the faint strains of piano from the saloon were part of the air itself. Xavier Sutton stepped down from his buckskin gelding, boots hitting hard-packed earth. He had not meant to be in town long, just long enough to trade for supplies and ride out before sundown. The saloon's porch creaked under his step, the place loud with laughter and the thud of boots on floorboards. He shifted his hat lower against the sun, ready to pass through the swinging doors when it happened. She fell. Right there at the top of the saloon step, a woman in a pale blue traveling dress, the hem torn and dusty, stumbled as if her legs gave out. Her bag tumbled beside her, contents scattering papers, a small journal, a broken hairbrush. Xavier caught her before her head hit the wood. Her eyes blinked open, wide and dazed, hazel with flecks of green that caught the sun. She looked up at him like she had not expected anyone to see her fall, let alone catch her. "You all right, miss?" he asked, voice low but steady. Her lips parted, no words at first. Then came a whisper. "I think I tripped." "You did more than that." He eased her to sit on the edge of the porch. "You fainted." "I have not eaten since yesterday," she admitted, cheeks coloring as she tried to gather herself. Xavier knelt beside her, picking up her scattered belongings. She watched his hands, her own trembling slightly in her lap. "I am Xavier Sutton," he said. "Let me help you inside. You look like you need water and a bite." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." "I am Ada Kingsley." He helped her up, steady, not rushing her. She leaned on him more than she meant to, but he did not seem to mind. Inside, the saloon went quiet for a moment as Xavier led her to a corner table, far from the card games and whiskey drinkers. The barkeep brought water and a plate of bread and cheese at Xavier's word. Ada ate like she had not seen food in days. He watched her, not out of pity, but something else, something that surprised him. She looked like trouble had followed her a long time, but she still held her chin up like she would not let it win. After a few minutes, she set the cup down and met his eyes. "I am sorry. I did not mean to make a scene." "You did not," he said. "But you might want to tell me why a woman alone, dressed for travel, is falling down outside saloons with nothing in her bag but a journal and a broken brush." Ada's fingers tightened around the cup. Her voice dropped low. "I was traveling to Fort Benton. I had a job offer their schoolteacher. But the man I paid to bring me up from Cheyenne, he took my money and left me in the night. I walked 12 miles to get here." Xavier let out a breath. "You walked 12 miles? I thought I could make it before I collapsed. I was wrong." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. She was about his age, maybe a year or two younger. Something in her eyes told him she had not had much kindness in recent months, maybe years. "You have anyone waiting for you in Fort Benton?" She shook her head. "No family. My parents died back east. I was trying to start over." Xavier nodded. "Well, Ada Kingsley, you landed in the middle of nowhere and still managed to fall at the feet of someone with a conscience." She gave a small laugh, the first bit of light in her voice. "Is that what you are?" "Sometimes," he said. "When it counts." She looked at him again, really looked. Something settled in her face then, like she had not had someone say that and mean it in a long time. He stood. "Come on. This place is no good for resting. I got a room at the boarding house up the way. The lady who runs it is decent, and I can pay for a few nights until you figure out what to do." Ada stood slowly, unsure. "I do not want charity." "It is not charity," he said. "It is what decent folks do for each other." She hesitated, then took his offered hand. The boarding house sat on the edge of town, a whitewashed building with flower boxes under the windows. Mrs. Elwood, the owner, gave Ada a once-over but said nothing once Xavier handed over the coin. Later, as he walked back toward the livery, Xavier felt something tighten in his chest. He had not expected her. But when she looked up at him on that saloon step, something in him shifted. A quiet thought he could not shake. He saw a future. Not just pity. Not just duty. Something else. He looked back once before turning the corner. From the second-floor window, Ada stood behind the lace curtain, watching him go with a look that said she had not expected kindness but she would not forget it. And halfway to the livery, he knew he would not forget her either. The morning after, the sky was overcast, the kind of pale gray that softened the ridges of the hills beyond Dead Horse Gulch. Xavier stood outside the livery, hitching a saddlebag closed with a quiet focus. His gelding shifted under the cinch, but he worked calm, steady, leather creaking under his hands. Behind him, boot steps approached on gravel. "I wasn't sure I'd find you this early," Ada said. He looked over his shoulder. Her dress had been brushed clean, the hem stitched where it had torn. She wore a shawl now, one too thin for the chill, but she didn't seem to notice. Her hair was pinned up plain, and her eyes held none of the dazed weariness he'd seen the day before. "I've been up since first light," he said. "Old habits. I figured as much." She glanced at the gelding's flank, then back to him. "Mrs. Elwood said you were heading out today." "I was." He tied off the last strap. "But I held off." Ada folded her arms across her middle. "Because of me?" "No," he said. "Because the trail west of here's washed out from the rains 2 nights past. Not safe for driving cattle or wagons yet." She studied him a moment, then nodded. "Good." He raised an eyebrow. "I need work," she said. "And I need someone who'll tell me the truth about this place. Not what folks want to sell a stranger." Xavier leaned against the post, arms crossed. "What kind of truth you lookin' for?" "Where decency lives in this town," she said. "Where a woman might earn her way without having to pretend she's less than she is." He didn't answer right away. A slow wind stirred dust across the yard. A wagon passed on the far road, its iron wheels grating over stone. "There's a widow runs a dry goods store near the church," he said finally. "Her boy broke his leg last month, and she's short on help. She's proud, though. Won't take just anyone." "I'll speak to her," Ada said. "If she tells me no, I'll ask someone else. I didn't walk this far to quit." "I believe that." She glanced at the saddlebag. "How long you plan to stay?" "Depends." "On what?" He didn't answer. Not directly. He shifted his stance, looked out across the open scrub beyond the last buildings of town. "There's land north of here," he said. "Flat and rich. Needs fencing. Needs someone to work it." She followed his gaze. "Yours will be if I decide to put down roots." Ada didn't speak right away. A crow called from the blackwood tree across the yard. "I was born in St. Louis," she said. "My father ran a print shop. He used to say ink never lies, but people do. He taught me to read before I could reach the table. I thought that would make the world easier to understand." She paused, then looked at him. "It didn't." Xavier nodded once. "The land doesn't lie either." "I'd like to see it," Ada said. "That land you spoke of." He studied her. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Just waited. "You ride." "Well enough. Come by just after noon," he said. "I'll have a second horse ready." She didn't thank him. Instead, she gave a small nod and turned back toward the main road, her steps sure. Xavier watched her go until she passed out of sight behind the water tower. Then he turned back to his horse, adjusted the bridle, and muttered, "Well, boy, looks like we ain't riding alone." He didn't smile, not exactly, but something eased in his jaw, and he stood a little straighter as he led the horse toward the corral gate. The trail north of Dead Horse Gulch wound through sage flats scattered with scrub pine, the earth damp but firm beneath the horses' hooves. By mid-afternoon, the sky had cleared to a pale blue, and the sun cast long light across the hills. Ada rode a roan mare borrowed from the livery, her back straight despite the unfamiliar saddle. Xavier rode ahead, not speaking much, letting the quiet settle between them. A hawk circled high above, casting a flicker of shadow across the trail. When he finally reined in at a rise overlooking a wide valley, she pulled up beside him. Below, the land stretched open and golden, broken only by a creek that bent like a ribbon through the grass. "This is it," he said, voice low. "Starts at that cottonwood bend and runs past those bluffs yonder." Ada leaned forward in her saddle, eyes tracing the land's quiet shape. "It's beautiful. It's work," he said. "But it's honest. Needs fencing. Water's good. The soil's held up better than I figured." She looked over at him. "You said you hadn't decided to stay, but you've walked this land like it's already yours." He rested his hands on the saddle horn. Some things settle in a man's bones before he says the words out loud. She nodded, then turned her gaze back toward the creek. "When I was a girl, I'd sit on the roof of our boarding house and watch the riverboats pass. I used to think if I could pick one and climb aboard, I'd find a place that felt like it belonged to me." Xavier adjusted his hat against the light. "You think this place might be it?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I didn't expect it to feel this quiet, like it's waiting." They rode down the slope, hooves slow over the softer ground near the creek. When they reached the water, Xavier dismounted and led his gelding to drink. Ada followed, kneeling at the bank and cupping water to her lips. It was cold and clean, the kind that came from deep in the hills. He watched her as she stood, brushing her hands dry against her skirt. "You're not afraid of the work?" "I'm tired of being afraid of the wrong things," she said. He didn't answer but motioned toward a stand of cedar near the far edge of the field. "There's an old line shack there. Needs a new roof, but the frame's good. I've been thinking of fixing it up before winter." She walked beside him, the horses trailing behind. Sunlight dappled through the branches as they reached the small building, bare walls, half a door, and a hearth blackened from years past. "I could help with the roof," Ada said. He looked over, surprised. "My father taught me to use a hammer," she said. "Said a girl should know how to hold her ground with more than just words." Xavier stepped inside the shack, ducking under the low beam. She followed, her footsteps soft on the dirt floor. He ran a hand along the wall, inspecting the timber. "I wasn't planning on company out here," he said. Ada's voice was even. "I wasn't planning on falling at your feet outside a saloon." He turned to face her. The light from the doorway caught the edge of her hair. She looked up at him without flinching. "I've known men who offered kindness when it was easy," she said. "But you didn't look away when I had nothing." He held her gaze. "You didn't ask for anything. That's what made it matter." They stood still in the half-light, the wind brushing through the open door. A deep quiet settled between them, not hollow, but full of something unspoken and steady. "I don't know what comes next," she said, voice low. "You don't have to," Xavier replied. "But if you stay, we'll build it honest." She nodded once, not as agreement but as promise. They walked out together, the shack behind them and the land wide open ahead. The sun was sinking low now, shadows stretching long across the grass. Xavier lifted her back onto the roan, then swung up into his own saddle. He didn't look at her as they turned toward town again, but she saw the way his hand brushed close to hers on the reins. Neither spoke on the ride back, and neither needed to. The wind moved through the grass like breath, and the silence between them held something quiet and growing. Something neither one of them would name just yet, but both had already begun to trust. The wind picked up the scent of pine and damp soil as evening settled over Dead Horse Gulch. The town quieted after supper, lamps glowing behind drawn curtains and smoke curling from chimneys. Xavier stood outside the boarding house stable, brushing down the gelding beneath a lantern hung low from a hook. The animal's coat was warm from the day's ride, and Xavier worked in silence, methodical. Bootsteps approached on the gravel walk. "I spoke with the widow at the dry goods," Ada said, stepping into the circle of light. He didn't look away from the horse. "She take you on?" "She did. Said I could handle her ledger better than she could. And I didn't flinch when her boy dropped a crate of flour on my foot." Xavier gave a quiet grunt. "That what it takes to pass her test?" "She said the last girl she hired cried over a broken jar of molasses. I told her I've seen worse things than spilled sugar." He stepped back from the horse and turned, wiping his hands on a rag tucked in his belt. "You'll do well there." Ada leaned against a fence post, arms folded, shawl tight around her shoulders. She asked if I had a husband coming to meet me. Xavier studied the angle she stood, the way her eyes didn't quite meet his. "What did you tell her?" "I said no. But I told her I wasn't alone." She let the words hang. A wagon passed near the edge of town, its lantern swinging. Xavier stepped closer. "Was that the truth?" "I think so." Her voice was quiet. "I don't know what to call what's forming between us, but it doesn't feel like something I imagined." He took off his hat and turned it in his hands. "I've spent most of my life not needing to explain myself to anyone. But with you I want to." Ada's expression didn't shift, but something in her shoulders eased. "I was 22 when my brother died," Xavier said. "He got thrown from a bronc outside Helena. I was supposed to be there. Instead, I'd gone east to look at a parcel of land. I didn't say goodbye." He paused, looking out toward the dark beyond the stable. "I carried that guilt longer than I should have. Figured if I didn't plant roots anywhere, I couldn't fail anyone again." Ada stepped off the post, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. "I know what it is to carry something that doesn't belong to you." He met her eyes then, close now, the lantern light catching the edge of her jaw. She reached out and rested her hand on his forearm. "You don't walk 12 miles unless you've already lost everything you were trying to hold on to," she said. Xavier nodded once, slow. "I'm not afraid of starting over, just afraid of doing it alone." Ada's fingers curled slightly where they touched him. "Then maybe we don't have to." He looked down at her hand, then back to her face. "I'm building a fence line next week. It'll take more than 2 hands. I'll be there after the store closes," she said. "I'm quick with a post-hole digger." A sound escaped him, not quite a laugh, but close. He reached up and touched her cheek, rough palm against soft skin. "You hungry?" he asked. "Mrs. Elwood gave me a loaf of cornbread and a pot of beans for helping her stack wood. I've got enough for 2. Ada's smile was small and tired, but real. "I'd like that." They walked back toward the boarding house together, side by side, her hand brushing his sleeve with each step. Inside, the fire was already lit in the parlor, the table laid with 2 tin plates. The room smelled of sage and smoke. As they sat, Xavier poured water from the pitcher and broke the bread in half, setting her piece close to the fire so it warmed. Neither of them spoke much while they ate. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of new things growing in the space where loneliness used to live. Afterward, she helped clear the plates, careful with the chipped crockery, her movements slow and sure. When she leaned against the windowsill, watching the moon rise above the rooftops, Xavier stood behind her, close but not touching. "I think I've found something good here," she said. "I didn't expect that." He watched her reflection in the glass. "Neither did I, but I'm not letting it slip past." Ada turned, facing him. "Then don't." He kissed her then, Not rushed, not uncertain. Just steady, like he'd been waiting for the right moment and finally found it. She leaned into it, hands resting lightly at his waist. When they stepped apart, she didn't look away. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Xavier touched her hair, brushing a strand behind her ear. "Then we'll build this life together. One fence post, one supper, one night at a time." And Ada, who had once thought the road would only ever take from her, nodded with a quiet certainty. "Yes, we will." The first frost came early that autumn, whitening the tops of fence posts and turning the grass brittle beneath their boots. Xavier stood with his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, hammering the final nail into the gate of the north pasture. Ada held it steady, her hands raw but sure, her breath visible in the cold morning light. They didn't need to say much anymore. The rhythm of shared work had shaped something wordless and steady between them. When he stepped back, Xavier ran his hand along the top rail. "That's the last of it." Ada leaned against the post. "Fence held through last night's wind. I checked it before sun up." He looked over, surprised. "You were out before dawn?" "I couldn't sleep," she said. "The quiet gets to me sometimes, but not in a bad way. It's just different from anything I've known." He nodded toward the barn. "Come inside. Fire's still going." I set coffee on the stove. The barn had become more than a place for tools and feed. Since the line shack proved too small to live in and the boarding house too far to keep returning to, they had begun sleeping in the hayloft while Xavier added a lean-to off the back. The walls were rough pine, but the warmth they'd built inside, with quilts stitched from Ada's old dress scraps and a stove Xavier salvaged from the trading post, held against the cold. She poured the coffee and handed him a tin cup. Her fingers brushed his briefly, warm despite the chill in the air. "I got a letter yesterday," she said, sitting on the stool beside the stove. "From the school board in Fort Benton." Xavier leaned against the doorframe, sipping slow. "What did they want?" "They offered the position again. Said they'd heard I was up this way and still hoped I might come." He didn't speak right away. The fire cracked between them. "I turned them down," she said. "Told them I'd found a different calling." He met her eyes. "You sure?" Ada nodded. "I used to think teaching was the only way I could make something useful of myself. But out here, I've done more than I ever thought I could. Built fences, helped birth a colt, learned how to read the land and not just books. I didn't know I was capable of that until I met you." Xavier's voice was quiet. "You did all that, not me. You gave me the place to try." Her eyes didn't waver, and the steadiness to believe I could. He stepped forward, setting his cup aside. "When I first came out here, I thought I was looking for land. But it turns out I was looking for someone who'd see this place the way I do." Ada stood, closing the space between them. "You found her." He touched his forehead to hers, the warmth of her breath soft against his skin. "Then I reckon it's time we stop waiting around and make this permanent." She leaned back just enough to see him. "You asking me?" "I am. You got anything to give me besides a ring of fence posts and a cook stove that won't heat even on its best day?" "I've got a home I want to build with you," he said, "and a life that's honest even when it's hard. I'll stand beside you through every rough season." She smiled, slow and sure. Then yes, they married at the small church east of town 2 weeks later. The widow from the dry goods store stitched Ada's dress from muslin she'd kept for years. Mrs. Elwood made preserves and biscuits for the gathering. A few hands from the livery came, and even the barkeep from the saloon arrived with a bottle of pear brandy. Xavier trimmed his beard and wore a shirt Ada had mended the week they met. He stood beside her at the altar, sunlight pouring through the plain windows, and said his vows in a voice that never once shook. That winter, they moved fully into the new cabin Xavier finished with help from 2 ranchers who owed him favors. The roof held against snow, and the hearth burned steady with pine from the grove they'd cleared together. Ada grew herbs in the window box and kept a ledger of every expense and harvest. Xavier raised a pair of milk cows and broke a new field for oats. Come spring, the first shoots pushed through the thawed ground, and Ada rested a hand over her belly as she watched Xavier mend a harness strap in the yard. "You think it'll be a boy or a girl?" she asked. He looked up, squinting against the sun. "I think it'll be ours, and that's enough for me." She smiled and walked to him, her apron dusted with flour. He pulled her close, hands gentle at her waist. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. "Not just the land, but someone who sees me as whole." "You were always whole," he said. "You just needed someone to walk beside you, not ahead." They stayed that way a while, the wind soft around them, the creek murmuring in the distance. The world didn't shout its joys here, it whispered them, steady and quiet. And for Xavier and Ada Sutton, that was enough. More than enough. They would grow old in that valley, raise children who knew the shape of love in the way their parents worked side by side, season after season. They would weather storms, carry losses, and still find each other's hands in the dark. And every morning, as the sun broke over the hills, they would rise not just to work but to each other.